this is part two. It really is a continuation of last week, but it focuses much more on the money system. If you can recall, last week I mentioned that the foundations in particular had worked to control history, and in particular they got these 20 historians that created what was the core of the American Historical Association. And for me, in the different studying that I've done, I think this topic today really underscores kind of the depths to which they suppressed, if you will, and hidden a really big part of history that most people are probably blissfully unaware, though I don't really think it's much bliss. But so there we go. Spiritual warfare on the political and economic battlefield, the money system. I really, with the title, do want to emphasize that this is a spiritual warfare. And again, warfare does not just stop at the Bible. It doesn't stop at just your mind, body, and soul. It continues and is very pervasive throughout the rest of the world. So, if we can go to Psalms 22:7, simply, the rich rule over the poor, borrower is servant to the lender. So if you can keep that throughout the duration of my message, that will really help. So the apex of what I'll be presenting today is about the Federal Reserve System. And that's a picture of the Federal Reserve there. It's in Washington, D.C. It's on Constitution Avenue. Makes it sound so official. If you look at the money here, I picked denominations that might be of interest to you to own someday. $100 bill, Federal Reserve note at the top, the 5,000 with the Federal Reserve note at the top. And you have modern day $100 bill. It has Federal Reserve note in the upper left corner. And then the $100,000 bill. Now, that has never been circulated in the public. And that was just for transfer between banks. And it's, to my knowledge, the only Federal Reserve note that doesn't actually say Federal Reserve note on it. It is the only one that says gold certificate. If you can see, I don't know how well you can see it all where you're at, but gold certificate is on the left-hand side, and so it looks kind of neat. So here's some quick facts about the Federal Reserve. Signed into law December 23rd, 1913. It was the fourth central bank that has been attempted or working in the United States. It's privately owned by member banks. It is no more federal than Federal Express. It has an absolute monopoly on currency in the U.S. It owns all of the gold in Fort Knox that was not sold to foreign interests. They hold it as collateral on the national debt. This was determined in 1981. It was presented to Congress in 1982 by the Reagan Gold Commission. So there's some actual findings for that. And also, during the Reagan years, they investigated where do people's income taxes go? And they found that 100% of personal income taxes go toward paying the federal debt due to the Federal Reserve. Now, the U.S. dollar purchasing power, if you've ever wondered why was it that you used to be able to have the dad worked his 9-to-5 job, came home by 6 o'clock, mom stayed home all day, nurtured the kids, made food, whatever. And that was cool. You owned a lot, you had a nice house, things were cool. Today, you have two parents working pretty decent jobs and still struggling to get by. Well, the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar from 1913 to the present has diminished by about 96%. So what that means is that a dollar in today's value is worth 4 cents in 1913 value. So it kind of helps underscore that. Some quotes that I really enjoy, and it's really in regard to the Federal Reserve System and the international bankers and these banking families. Theodore Roosevelt, who at one time was President of the United States, on March 1922, said, "These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of newspapers and the columns of these papers to club into submission or derive out of public office officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government." So again, it goes into what I was talking about last week with secret societies and that invisible government idea. And this is just a tool that they use. Now this guy, John Hyland, this was reported in the New York Times the day after Roosevelt's message, and he was the mayor of New York City, and this quote really makes me feel good because it lets me know I'm not the only one who believes these things. But it says, "The warning of Theodore Roosevelt has much timeliness today, for the real menace of our republic is this invisible government which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. It seizes in its long and powerful tentacles our executive officers, our legislative bodies, our schools, our courts, our newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection. To depart from mere generalizations, let me say that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make catspaws of party leaders, use the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place in nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of newspapers and magazines in this country." So, there's a little introduction to the power that the Fed and these international banking families have as expressed by well-known and respected politicians of the day. So, let's kind of get into how money is created, because I'm sure we'd love to create more of it for ourselves. Unfortunately, it would be illegal for us to do this process, but this is the process that the Fed uses. The Fed Open Market Committee approves the purchase of U.S. bonds. They say, you know what, we want more money, so let's authorize the purchase. So they purchase bonds, and the way they purchase it is they create a number in a ledger, and they create money out of nothing. Give it to the United States government, and they buy a bond. Now, bonds always collect interest, and that's why you get the notion that we have a debt-based currency, because we, or the U.S. government, has to continually pay interest on the bonds that the Federal Reserve has purchased out of nothing. They pay for the bonds with electronic credits to the seller's bank, and the bank uses these deposits as reserves. They can loan out 10 times the amount of their reserves to new borrowers, all at interest. So how that works is, here you have a $100 U.S. savings bond. So Fed buys that. It puts into the market $1,000. There's a $1,000 bill for it, in case you've never seen one. Now, if the Fed chooses to restrict or reduce the amount of money in circulation, all they do is reverse the process. So if you have this $100 bond, the Fed goes, okay, well, we're going to sell this bond. So they sell the bond, and suddenly $1,000 vanishes out of the economy because of the 10-to-1 ratio. I hope that makes some sense. If not by the end of today, ask me later. Matthew 21:12. Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. This is the only time in Jesus' ministry that he used force, and it was on money changers. Now, what was actually going on here is that Jews at the time had to pay what was called the temple tax, and the only denomination or coin they were allowed to use was the silver half shekel of the temple. So they would come in, bring their money, and just as any group that owns a monopoly on something, they would charge interest for whatever the market would bear. And so a kind of typical currency exchange is you'd have a shekel of, I don't remember where that one's from, but the big silver one. And then the interest are all those little tiny ones, I think 11 pieces of something, I don't remember specifically. But that was the practice that was going on just outside the temple so that people could come in and pay their temple tax. Now, about 1,000 years after Jesus, you had the goldsmiths, which created pretty much what we think of as modern banking today. The goldsmiths held other people's gold because they had very safe vaults. And the first paper money was just a receipt saying that you had